Hello, welcome back to class. Good morning, or good evening, or whatever time you guys happen to be on. Today we're going to talk about lesson 3, the compounds of life. The first couple chapters we have talked about in the first couple sections, we've talked about the different things inside the human body, or inside living things like carbon, phosphorus, nitrogen, stuff like that. And then we've also talked a little bit about what happens with hydrocarbons. So, the hydrogen and carbon things combined together. A couple uses for those and everything like that. But in this section, we're going to talk about specifically a couple different compounds that are inside of you and inside of living people that are living things that are incredibly important for the survival of anything. It's pretty self-explanatory when we call them compounds of life that we're talking about compounds involved in life. I'm not sure how else to put that in a easier way to understand. They're just compounds that are found in life. And we're going to start off with two words that we have learned already: polymer and monomer. So we've learned this quite a while ago. A polymer is a large molecule formed from repeated combinations of smaller molecules called monomers. And the monomer is the small molecule that forms a link in the polymer chain. So polymer is the chain, and a monomer is the link in the chain. There's actually quite a bit of polymers, both organic and non-organic. We're going to go through a couple examples just right now, but just keep in mind, a polymer is a chain, and a monomer is a link in the chain. So there's a bunch of natural polymers, which that just means they're made by living things. Those things usually contain carbon. And they also contain these elements, this is right there: hydrogen, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus, which we've talked about most of those. Haven't talked much about sulfur, but we talked about the phosphorus cycle, and then the water cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. On the bottom, you see synthetic polymers. Those are human-made ones that are not found in nature. So they still have they're still a polymer. They're still a chain made up of a bunch of links that we call monomer, but you can't find them in nature. We make them in laboratories and in factories, but you can't find them in nature. Here we have some examples of both natural and then synthetic right here. So we got cotton is a polymer, but it's natural. We get it from this plant right here. It's used to make clothing. We got silk from silkworms. That's a chain of a bunch of little links. Wood might not feel like that's a chain of stuff, but it is. It's a bunch of wood. It's a bunch of chains of little things. Natural latex from a rubber tree is also a polymer, and we can use that to make tires or rubber bands, but the individual rubber polymers, they're chains and they're natural. Chitin is a polymer that a lot of arthropod shells are made out of. So crustaceans and bugs and stuff, a lot of their I would say armor their exoskeleton is made of these natural chains. And then everybody likes carbohydrates. Carbohydrates themselves are polymers, and proteins are polymers. So both of those things, which are things that we eat, I hope you don't eat any of this stuff over here. I hope you don't eat the shell of this, but you might eat the inside. But these things, both proteins and carbohydrates, are polymers. They're chains of repeating monomers. And we're actually going to go more into detail in those by the end of this slide. So some synthetic polymers, we won't find these out in the environment being naturally made. Polyethylene, used to make plastic sandwich bags. CDs, although even those are pretty rare nowadays, they're made from synthetic polymers. They're made from chains. Styrofoam's made from a chain of stuff. These plastic bottles, again, it feels like it's not. It feels like it should be a solid thing, and it is, but it's made of a bunch of overlapping chains of polymers. Polyester, nylon, lycra, spandex, all that stuff, they're all man-made polymers. They're all synthetic polymers. Here's the video I would encourage you to go and watch. It just gives another example of how we make polymers and a couple more examples. So go ahead and pause this video, go to the PowerPoint and open this, and then watch it. Okay, this is assuming you did watch that video. So if we're talking about any organic molecule found in a living organism, we call them a biomolecule. And we're going to go over a few biomolecules right now. Nucleic acids, lipids, carbohydrates, and proteins. The first one is a nucleic acid. You guys might have heard of DNA. You maybe have heard of RNA. I know you guys have heard of DNA though, but that's a nucleic acid. It's found in all plant and animal cells, and it encodes information. So the instructions that your body builds itself with is found in your DNA. It stores all of the genetic information, instructions for an organism. Whether that be a plant or a human or a fly or a dog, they all have DNA inside of them, and that DNA are the instructions to build that organism. The monomers of DNA and RNA are called nucleotides. So if DNA and RNA are polymers, then nucleotides are the monomers. All nucleotides contain the same phosphate group. Each nucleotide also contains a 5-carbon sugar and a base called the nitrogen group. These two groups vary among nucleotides. And we're going to see what that means in just a second. But they all have the same phosphate group. So they all have like the same base. We'll see that in a second. Oh, I shouldn't use the word base because base means something different here. They all have the same backbone. They don't have the same base. They have the same backbone of a phosphate group. So this looks pretty fancy and complicated. They all have the same phosphate group as we just talked about. They have a sugar, and then they have a base. So DNA inside of every single one of your cells right now looks like this. Okay, the backbone that we were talking about is pretty much this orange curly part that keeps going around. That's like kind of these two put together. Kind of. And then this colorful part is this right here, the base. So the different colors represent the different bases. And if you'll notice in DNA, there's only 4 colors, right? So your DNA, everything that you are, is written in a code that only has 4 letters, just in a bunch of different orders, to make you who you are. RNA is something similar. It's in your body. It comes from DNA. It kind of helps build proteins and stuff. You'll notice that there's also only 4 colors here, but this color is different than this one. This is purple, and that's red. But the point still stands that this is a polymer, and each monomer of the polymer is right here. So this part of the orange thing and then this yellow thing would be one of the monomers that make up the chain. Same thing over here. This blue part, along with the little part of the orange behind it, that would be one monomer of... I don't know if you guys can hear my dog. She is a crybaby. She doesn't like learning about DNA and RNA. And I might have to close the window because I can't teach if she keeps... Hey. So we got the sugar phosphate backbone and then the base pair. Keeping in mind that this is one of the base pairs, this is one of the base pairs, and one of these is just one of the monomers that help mix up your DNA. That helps make up your DNA. So what elements compose nucleic acids? Hopefully you guys can automatically just say, well, carbon probably because it's a living thing, right? Carbon, the note 2 slides before said nitrogen, right? Nitrogen group. We know there's phosphates. And you can probably say hydrogen to be safe because hydrogen's pretty much in everything as well. And if we look at this, we're pretty much right. We got nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen. You might not see any carbon here. I don't see the letter C anywhere, but actually everywhere there's not a letter, like right here and here and here and here, there's a carbon, and even here. It's just we don't draw those because it would take too much space up. And you can see that in these little pictures there are like the letter C's. So that was one of the biomolecules. Those are nucleic acids, your instructions. The instructions on how to build you are written in your DNA. The next biomolecule we're going to talk about that happens to be a polymer is a lipid. And these include fats and oils that are not soluble in water, which means we can't dissolve them in water. And they contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. We know they're not soluble in water because they are nonpolar. And last chapter we learned like dissolves like, right? Water molecules are polar, so they cannot dissolve nonpolar molecules. So they are not soluble in water. If you put oil in water, you know they don't mix because water is polar, and fats and oils and lipids are nonpolar, so they don't mix. We also mentioned these two words, I think, in section 1, in lesson 1. Saturated fats have only single bonds. Unsaturated fats have at least one double bond or triple bond between carbon atoms and are solids at room temperature. So here we see what we mean. This is what a lipid looks like. And if they have only single bonds like that, they are probably a solid at room temperature. So we see this butter is, for the most part, solid at room temperature. The reason why is because it can stack on top of itself like that so easily. So it can kind of make a nice solid structure. Whereas the unsaturated ones, the ones that we said have a bend or they have a double bond or a triple bond, their little tails are all bent out of shape, which means it's really hard to stack them, which means they end up acting more like a liquid. So both of these are lipids. If you put butter on your toast or anything like that, that's a lipid. And if you use oil to cook, that's also a lipid. They're both lipids. But this is the unsaturated ones. This is the unsaturated fat, and this is the saturated fat. Okay? Another interesting thing, your cells, all of your cells, their walls, your cell walls are all made up of these lipids. So it is important to eat fats. Fats aren't bad. You need fats. You'd probably want to focus on the healthier ones. Maybe don't eat a stick of butter. maybe get your fats from like just a little bit of butter and like fish and stuff like that. Healthy stuff. So lipids were one polymer, and you can tell it's a polymer because it's a chain of repeating things, right? So it's a chain, it is a polymer. Next polymer we're going to talk about, everybody's favorite food group, which is carbohydrates. And these are how you guys store and release energy. This is also, sorry, my dog is bothering me again. Carbohydrate is an organic molecule used by cells to store and release energy. Complex carbohydrates are natural polymers made from sugar monomers. So sugar will keep adding on top of itself until it makes something called a carbohydrate. Here's some examples of carbs. We got good carbs are usually in like the starchy, hard vegetables. And the bad carbs are usually bread and sugar and stuff like that. Coco, what else do you gotta add something? You wanna keep talking? You're interrupting the class, Coco. I'm gonna have to rapid exit you, I'm sorry. So it's not bad to have a soda, right? But it's bad to always have a soda. It's not bad to eat bread, but it's bad to just eat nothing but bread. Same thing with pasta. I mean, if you have pasta, it's fine. But if you just eat nothing but pasta, it might be bad. You want to focus on having more of the good carbs. But in both cases, the carbs are still just chains of sugar. And I know it sounds strange that like pasta is made out of sugar. Yeah, it's chains of sugar, so that's how we get the energy out of it. It might not be the sugar you're used to that's in like this stuff, but like from a biological standpoint, it is a type of sugar in there. And the sugar adds chain. Oh, how do I not show you a chain of that? All right, let's do let's break the mold here. Let's go to excuse me. So, oh, that doesn't help. Here you can see it's a bunch of stuff stacked right here, stacked right there, stacked right there, stacked right there. It's just a bunch of sugars. You keep adding on to them, keep adding on and adding on and adding on until you get ridiculously long chains of carbohydrates. Something like this, a bunch of chains of sugar. Sometimes it's all in a line, sometimes it's branched out like that, but you can see how this is a polymer, right? It's a chain of repeating monomers. Let's get back to here. The last biomolecule we're going to talk about are proteins. So we've talked about nucleic acids, lipids, carbohydrates, and now proteins. These are made of amino acid monomers. Okay, so we talked about amino acids in lesson 2. Amino acids are made of an amino group, a carboxyl group, and another group called a side chain or an R group. We don't really need to worry about the details of those things, but carboxyl group, amino group, and an R group. And the instructions for building proteins from amino acids are stored in the DNA. So we talked about DNA, that's the instructions, right? Well, once your body reads the DNA, it needs to use amino acids to make proteins. Okay? So once your body reads the DNA, it uses amino acids to make protein. And amino acids are each of these little dots. Each one of these is an amino acid. You stack a bunch of dots next to each other, and you stack a bunch of those next to each other, and those next to each other, and those next to each other, you eventually get what a protein actually looks like. So a protein is a polymer because it's made of a bunch of repeating chains of these little amino acids. It's just folded up into a weird scrunchy ball of scrunchiness, but each one of these things is an amino acid, all making a chain that will eventually become a protein. Okay, so a protein is the polymer, and amino acid would be the monomer. Now let's talk about some other things that are in the human body. We won't spend too much time on this, but we focus mostly on like carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, and oxygen, right? A little bit of phosphorus, a little bit of sulfur. There are some other things in there, and some things might sound pretty strange that our body has, but we need some of this stuff in our bodies in order to function correctly. So sodium and potassium, you've probably heard you need sodium and you need potassium. Most people know that we can get potassium from bananas. We get sodium from salt, right? We also have all of this other stuff we need inside of our bodies that you might not think about. Calcium, most of you guys know we need calcium for bones and stuff. Whether you know it or not, though, calcium is a metal. So you need metal to make your bones. That sounds strange, but it is a metal, and you do need that for your bones. Fluorine, you might have heard fluoride in your toothpaste. That helps your teeth stay strong. Iodine is kind of like a regulator for a lot of your hormones and a lot of how fast you burn energy. So you might have seen iodized salt or something like that. Iron, you need iron in your blood in order to carry oxygen, otherwise you cannot carry oxygen. So people with iron deficiencies can't usually carry oxygen enough, so they need iron essentially. But literally iron like the metal iron, yeah. Copper, like the metal, is also in your body. Potassium and sodium we already talked about. Magnesium, you guys might not know, but that is also a metal. And we mentioned sulfur as well. So there's actually quite a bit of interesting things inside of you might not think about. The fact that like magnesium, iron, calcium, copper, those are like metals. And your body needs them to survive. It's a little crazy, but it's pretty cool. What functional groups compose proteins? Well, that was over here. It's talking about these functional groups that were from lesson 2. So we have amino groups, carboxyl group, and then a side group or R group. And that is it for lesson 3.